Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Therapists in Conversation. And we are on episode 37 now.
It's episode 36, so this is the end of our third year.
Oh my good grief, I knew there was something going on here. We've become a bit of a tradition, have we not? So, interestingly enough, that's going to be the topic tonight. Do you not just love the way I do that? Traditionally, it's a case of we used to do this in a room where people would be having video cameras, or maybe not even that. It would just be a private thing and nobody else would see it. And the strange thing is that something happened and traditions all over the place were being usurped. That's a nice word for you. So, what is it about tradition? Why do we need it? What's it for? Has it had its day? Or are we making new traditions? So before we go on with that, let's introduce ourselves. Angela.
Hi, I'm Angela from Inner Pathways. I am a kinesiologist and coach working with a wide range of people to help them put down their baggage that they no longer need to carry around, but have just got so used to holding on to allow them to then move forward to do what it is they want to do in life.
And non-traditionally, I'm going to go with our shins and say Tony.
Hey, thank you, Leslie. My name's Tony Gordon, and I'm a growth mindset consultant. I help businesses to alleviate any issues or overwhelm burnout that the management are having and help them to get back on the path to actually working better, more productive, and less attrition and less absence.
And Willie.
Thanks, Angela. Angela, you're not Angela.
You can thank me too if you want.
Thank you. I'm Willie Nicol. I'm the cop turned coach. I was a police officer for 31 years before a career in corporate security. I'm now a mindset coach, and I help people find solutions to whatever's keeping them stuck or stopping them getting the results they want in life.
I'm Leslie Marsh, and I'm a holistic culture consultant, which is new for me. You would think, wouldn't you? I should be used to it by now. But there's something in this water. I'm not entirely sure. I might have having some of Willie's stuff. But basically, it's a case of looking at the culture of nurture within businesses so that they can actually actualize their ideas of what their growth should be, get their proactivity within the ranks going, get the productivity up, and their absenteeism down. So that's me, really. Right then. Now, traditionally, we wouldn't really talk about self-care and well-being in the workplace. It would just be a case of get in there, punch your time card, and then go and do what you have to do at the workplace, whatever it is, so whatever you're doing. Listen to the managers who are going to be kind of telling you what to do and what not to do, and then you come back, punch your card again, go home and do something else. However, this is all changing now, which is probably a good thing, don't you think? Willie?
Yes.
See, you opened your mouth there and I thought, he's going to say something.
I think that certainly the last few years with the pandemic, lockdown, and so on and so forth, and all the ramifications attached to that, people were obliged to reassess the traditional way of working. So there was working from home, furlough, online, Zoom, etc., etc. And I think that's created quite a shockwave, if you like, if I can use that word, in the traditional way of thinking about how do we work, where do we work, how long do we work for, how many days off do we have. So in that sense, the traditional way of working is no more.
We are looking at blurred lines a bit here and boundaries that are being crossed all the time, I think. And it has been a big paradigm shift in the point that when we first started getting computers that were going to be in our houses, we were told then, this is way back in the late 80s, I think, that far back, that it was going to be a case that you wouldn't have to go out to work anymore. You could just do everything from home. And yet the tradition held on so hard that it took a pandemic to actually knock it out of the water. What do you think, Angela?
I don't think that all companies have stayed that way. I think a lot of companies have gone back to the traditional way of working, and they've gone back into the office, and they've gone back to the processes that they had before, where you are back to punching your time clock, arriving and doing whatever you've got to do. Because not everyone's comfortable giving the control over to their staff to actually manage their own time. And unfortunately, there are a number of places where micromanagement is still a big thing. And for some people that works, but for a lot of people it doesn't. And hopefully people will start to see that as their staff choose to walk out the door into different roles, that they may have to see that they need to make that change. I'm not as optimistic that the corporate world is where you're mentioning it is just yet.
Maybe not in Europe. Elsewhere, perhaps. I used to work for somebody.
I would possibly question that too.
Well, they say they talk a good game, HBR. But there you go. I used to work for a guy who, when I was bringing in new ideas, he stood there behind the operating table and said, I've been standing here for the last 23 years doing it my way, and I'm not going to do it any other way. Because you can't tell me what I'm doing is wrong. And I think that's part of the issue, isn't it, Tony? It's the mindset of what can change. And if somebody tells you there's a different way of doing it, then suddenly you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, and I don't think it's always they're doing anything wrong. But what I do think you're right is that some people also put their heels in because they don't want to change. Partly because you said they've done it for a long time and it has been that way. But a lot of the time, when it especially comes to business owners, small to medium size, I always call it their baby. It's like their baby. They've done it for so long that way that they don't want to leave the reins or hand over to anybody else. So they find that sort of transition thing difficult. And that's why the company can't move forward a lot of the time. But what Willie started talking about was great is about the change that's happened over the last few years. Prior to lockdown, though, I worked in a bank, and if you think of banks, you would not normally think of them work from home because of the security issues with customers' details. People can see things on screens. But they were already trialing that because my department was already doing it. We were the quality department. We were actually able to do at least one day a week work from home. And the idea was because of the wellbeing side and looking after your staff, because it's not only traditional way of working it's changing, it's a traditional family way of working is changing. The traditional farms are not quite the way they always were because the jobs aren't. If you think about it, the traditional way was working was Sunday out to work. It was 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, weekends off, maybe with the kids, everything. But now jobs aren't like that. It can be over a 7-day period. So you can have the kids there when you're working. And there needs to be that way of looking at it. And I think the hybrid way was a step towards it. But the next stage is the flexibility, flexi working. That'll be the stage we know that this tradition then is actually taking another step forward as well. Because it's about looking at hybrid's great, so I can work from home or work in the office. But when are people at their best working and why aren't we utilising that? I know a lot of people who used to be in the mornings and I was working, I managed them and they'd come in and they'd get hangovers or whatever. They were never at the best in the morning. But you watch that person at 12 o'clock till 5, 6, 7 at night, brilliant. So then why aren't we looking at things like that? And breaking the traditional mold we're saying is people actually are more productive at certain times of the day. Not everybody's the same way. So why don't we look at that and how they work? And I think that's where Andrew's right. There's still this mentality of a lot of businesses going, that's maybe a step too far. But I'd like to see that tradition changing now, is making the corporate world more to fit in with how the personal world actually changing.
You can see their point that they're paying out a lot of money on these leases for these buildings. If nobody's going to be coming into them, what are they doing there? You know, and
well, as Tony was mentioning, these changes were happening. So I worked for the sister company that Tony worked for, and I was working 2 days a week from home from 2012. So it can work, it does work. And the team I was in, I was the only person based in Scotland for a big chunk of those 5 years that I was there. Towards the end, there was 2 of us, but we didn't work necessarily together, but the rest of my team were all over the globe. So the flexi time, why not? If we're working in global teams, some of my teams were coming online at 2, 3, 4 in the morning.
Yeah.
Some of my teams weren't coming online till or well, to lunchtime and so on, depending on where they were in the world, and we just got on with it. And I think it's that point, as long as people know what hours to be expecting to see somebody, then I think it can work exactly as Tony's saying. But I think it is that point that there are fantastic organisations out there who have already started the hybrid model, who've been doing the hybrid thing for years. I worked down in the early 2000s in Bristol, where one of my managers worked 1 day a week from home. Although in saying that, whenever anyone said to me he was working from home, it was always with quotes, because no one actually believed he was working. So when you've got that challenge as well, it can be a bit tricky. So I think what's happened recently, yes, a lot of people have understood that working from home isn't always going to have quotes around it, because that was how it had to happen. And people are starting to see that there is a need for that. But the challenge as well with the family and everything else is that not everyone's homes are set up to have mum and dad and possibly the oldest sibling working from home. They might not have 3 office desks or even 2 office desks and space to do that. So when it comes to that flexibility, there then needs to be that option that actually I need to be in the office because I'm not getting any work done at home, because I've got 3 screaming kids, 4 barking dogs and 2 cats, or whatever else it might be going on in the background. And actually, for my mental health, I need to be in the office. And I think that there's a piece of that's not been looked at. And Leslie, you're mentioning about the office spaces not being used. They were already getting to that point where it was ratios to desks. It was at 1.4 FTE per desk, or whatever the ratios were, because desks weren't being utilised when people were off sick, they were on holiday or whatever else. So there wasn't that full complement anyway. So hot desking was starting to come in. They were reducing that footprint. And I think those footprints may reduce even further going forwards. Or they may become co-working spaces where people can say, look, do you know what? We'll hire 10 desks in that building in this city. If that's where you want to work for the day, book in and grab yourself a desk.
It's a good point, because Leslie, when you mentioned there about the corporates having all these buildings, but how much money and overheads would they save by not having those huge buildings?
Oh yeah,
and I look at a great point there. I work in a place which is a co-working area. I have a therapy room in it and I have a training room in it that I use, and it's perfect for me. I'm only there half the time of the week because I do workshops and things the rest of the time, so I don't always have to be in the building. And there's a lot of buildings. Well, now you've got these huge buildings. They can be opened up to be spaces like that for co-working spaces or for people to hold workshops, things like that. There's so many small businesses that would love an opportunity like that don't have that facility, rightly as Anne said, because they can't always do things at home. So it would save the largest business the overheads, but they can lease these buildings out and still have an income coming from them.
There's a kind of bit of familiarity
in the first place.
Yeah, there's a kind of bit of familiarity about going out the house, getting dressed in the morning, and getting ready to go to work, because you're changing your mindset, you're changing your headspace as you have that commute. And I think that was part of the issue when we were in lockdown and people were not really making the boundaries, because a lot of them weren't having this commute situation where they were getting into the way of changing their mind space. But this has all got to do with what's been handed down to us as well. This is what tradition is, isn't it? It's the values and beliefs and the understandings and the things that we learn about what's expected of us to carry on from what went before. You know, it's also, as far as mindset's concerned, in some ways, the values and beliefs that we're passed on to us from our grandparents about where money comes from and how hard it is to get it, and how good we have to be, or we have a level that we have to stay at, and we can't go and do this, or we can't go because your granda never did anything like that, you can't do it. So there's that side of tradition and the cultural part of it that is handing down edicts of behaviour and understanding. There's also like the fun part, like we were talking about just before we started recording, about ceilidhs and things. In Scotland, that's a dance, but there's, why have a D in the alphabet if you're not going to use it in something that doesn't sound it? That's another tradition. The language is wonderful, especially Gaelic. But it's one of those things that part of the social structure has got to do with, I suppose, the hive mentality of who the workers are and who the managers are, and where do we fit? Are we all going to be scrabbling for new places now? Is this where the new tradition starts to come?
I think that there has to be a balance. There's the old saying, there are only two things certain in life, death and taxes. I would add a third, which is change, because they often say change is inevitable. But we very often don't like change because we like to do it the traditional way. So I think during lockdown, a lot of people were a bit discombobulated by the fact that they had to stay at home. They didn't have that routine and structure of getting up, going to work, chatting to their pals around the coffee machine, having a bit of a laugh and a joke, doing their work, then coming home. How was your day, dear? That was lovely, thank you, darling. Right. And that routine was abruptly and brutally taken away from some people who did not like it. And I know because I have clients like that who didn't like the uncertainty of what happened. But as I say about change is inevitable. And I don't think we'll change back to the traditional way in total. Although I take Angela's point, was it not Elon Musk said, get back to the office or you're getting the sack? That was it. P45 for those in Scotland. You get the sack if you don't come back and do what you're meant to do. So that's one way of dealing with it. Whereas other organisations, for example, I believe the civil service, said, do you work from home? And that really hasn't worked out all that well either. So I go back to the point about there has to be a balance between identifying the organisational needs, the customer needs, like me being a customer or whatever, our patron, and the employees' needs. And very often these three factors don't seem to kind of mesh together.
And I think you also have got to think is different industries or different populations that actually can't all work from home. So you get people that keep talking about this, but you think a lot of factory ones that I spoke to in the manufacturing industry, you can't take those big machines suddenly home and go, all right, we'll take them home, work from home today. So they understand that their role means they cannot do that. So they still have that structure. And a lot of people still love the structure of it. But Willie made a great point. Change is, what they're all saying is change is constant. It is the one constant there is change. But we've also got to think about the mental health, which is something for all of us to do, because one of the things that I found the most, and this was really ironic, at the beginning of lockdown, I had a couple of clients who used to work with in the bank who came to me because they suffered from issues with isolation. Because exactly as Willie said, every morning at 9:30, they would go and get the coffees for the team. My team did the same thing. We'd all go together. We'd go down, we'd get the coffees, you walk back. You're right, have a chat, whatever, what happened. And they were struggling with the fact they couldn't do that. They were in team meetings on Zoom like this, but they didn't feel comfortable. You couldn't just sit to the person next to you and have a conversation because everybody can see you're doing that. You could see it in the room, but for some reason that never bothered you when you're in a room next to you. But if you sit here, everybody's listening to your conversation. So they also felt it was impersonal being in these ones just on Zoom. And they struggled. And the ironic thing is now people getting told they need to maybe go back to an office, they're coming for the opposite reason. They're having difficulty then now adapting their mind to going back to what they call the hive mentality and get in with all these voices, all these sounds all the time, because they're so used to working alone and they work. Initially, they thought they couldn't be as productive. They realize now because they don't get disturbed as many times, they're actually more productive. So from the business perspective, it's great working from home. They're productive, but for their mental health side, they're losing everything because of the isolation. How do you get that balance with tradition unless we start changing?
I think there's also the element that you go into the office and you interact with your colleagues, with your supervisors, with your juniors, and you bounce ideas off each other, and you get that kind of stimulus. You learn, you grow, you create new ideas or whatever, which is not always possible on a Zoom call. So I go back to the bit about balance. How do organisations find that sweet spot where they're in the office or not in the office, productivity, growth, ideas, and as you say, Tony, the isolation thing, just get up, patting your pal on the shoulder and saying, hi, how's it going? That's great. You can't do that in a Zoom call.
That's an interesting thing that just came into my head when you were talking there, Willie, was not just the balance as far as business is concerned, But the balance, because you're working from home, in relationships as well, and there's traditional roles that you've worked out. I mean, we know that we're all supposed to be, you know, like, men are supposed to be able to go and do the dishes and the hoovering and things like that, but it doesn't always work out that way. And, you know, sometimes you get a wee surprise with that when they talk a good game and then suddenly it doesn't happen. But it's one of those things that there's always this shifting of position that you have to kind of, you know, oh, you're at home. Why, you know, you're here, so you'll just have to go and do the shopping, or you go and pick the kids up, or, you know, because I've done it for so long, you can have a shot at it now. But there's still not that understanding of what it is that they actually do when they're out at the office or the factory, or where it is that they need to go. Then also one of the biggest things that we have stress-wise is the emergency services. And I include vets in that. And also mental health situations. We know already people who are dealing with that on a daily basis, trying to get a fourth emergency service into action so that people can get a first responder on the telephone right away instead of having to go through other avenues. So the traditional things that we are used to are changing, but it's very much a case of, I think, also habit. You're so used to doing one thing, like instead of calling for help for mental health, you phone 999 and want to talk to an ambulance person. Instead, you could be phoning another number. And even although the police have tried, particularly the police and fire have tried to put other numbers in, instead of the 999, we have 101 and 111 for, I think it's 111 for NHS 24, isn't it? Something like that, or 124. But it's one of those things that they've changed it again. How am I supposed to keep up with this? I mean, it's somebody's a new idea, well, it'll be better this way. Actually, not necessarily.
There's one tradition with that then I'd love to see. Somebody that has a long-standing illness and end up in hospital, or it always drove me insane going to A&E and looking at people who are about an insider waiting, who should never have been in A&E, and looking at the pressure of it. And it got me during COVID, when I had to get taken in because of COVID, and there was nobody, and going through the A&E department, there was no one there. Where did all these people that had all these illnesses, injuries that meant they had to be in A&E all the time, where did they go during COVID? Because you never saw any of them. Oh, I can't go there, there's an illness, or that thing's too scary going in. It was quite amazing. But that's a traditional thing you said, is that we actually, as A&E, we go straight to a hospital that if you feel ill or somewhere. But 9 times out of 10, the people that go there, not necessarily needing to go. So there's a lot of these traditional things that we have that needs to change as well to relieve pressure on there, so that the people who really do need the help can get it.
Angela has a good one for that, because it's what constitutes an emergency in someone's mind.
Well, it wasn't just that. It's the fact that you've then got the people that do need it, but don't want to be a burden on the system. So they don't go. Yep. And there were situations of that during COVID where they didn't go because they didn't want to be a burden on the service. And then ended up in the hospital, ended up contracting it and not coming back out of the hospital. Whereas the services that a quick appointment with a doctor or a quick check into A&E and get a nebulizer for an hour probably would have saved their life, but they didn't go. So I think there's that balance where there are people that are going in with what they seem to be as emergencies, and I think, Leslie, what you're talking to was an exercise I did with the cadets.
Yeah.
When I actually had to, I came up with a big long list of what people have actually phoned the emergency services for that weren't actual emergencies, like my Chinese takeaways just arrived and it's cold. I want you to arrest the restaurant owner for sending me out cold food, or someone stolen my snowman. So those were actual genuine 999
I got
calls.
one as well. Somebody phoned up for A&E as well, because their hamster had sore teeth.
No, don't even go there. Don't start me on emergency calls with hamsters.
Yeah, don't get it going.
A traditional thing that we don't want to be a burden, quite so. It's the old stiff upper lip.
Yes.
Yeah.
My leg is falling off because I've hit it with a hacksaw, but I'm fine. A wee bit of a Monty Python sketch, I guess. But But people thought, no, there's people worse off than me. I won't be a burden on the system. I won't go there. They're saying save the NHS and don't kill your granny and all this sort of stuff. Don't get me started on the messaging. I do remember right enough as a young police officer when an elderly lady phoned 999 and I went to her house and she needed a light bulb changed because she was too short to get to it, right? And I did it quite happily and then had to give her a wee spiel about, please don't phone 999 for that again. But poor old soul, I was quite happy to do it. The definition of emergency has become very fluid, shall we say. I mean, the hamster teeth and all this sort of stuff. And then you've got the other, this is misogyny, old soldiers who would refuse to be a burden. And again, we're back to the balance thing that, see you and your hamster. But Mr. Smith, Mrs. Smith, if your leg is falling off, please do come to accident emergency. There was a whole thing about, we could be here all night about tradition and COVID and all the paraphernalia round about it. But I think in some respects, we've got to look at the upsides to what happened. The vaccination programme, some streamlining of the NHS and so on and so forth. But again, go back to the change thing. Was that we had to change because of the lockdown, or was it going to come anyway, or did that make it come quicker?
I think it made it come quicker. I think you're right. Well, I think things were already changing before that anyway. But for me, people talk about lockdown still, how bad it was, but there is so many positive things that's come out of lockdown. One thing is more community spirit. To me, I've seen more of that now than I saw for a long time. People looking out for other people, wanting to help each other, talking to neighbours. I keep talking about a thing. I grew up in the area in East Kilbride, Greenhouse, and when we moved there, it was one of those streets that literally the old-fashioned way is that nobody locked their doors. If somebody needed something, they just chapped on the door. It used to be always the same. For some reason, one family always needed a half loaf of bread. Our mum would take half of her loaf and say, okay, that's what I've got left, just have that. So you'd have some, they would have something. And every Christmas and New Year, somebody would put it on so everybody went to their house. And it was like alternate. And that community spirit for me died away for a long time. But COVID has brought a lot of that back. I saw people, there was a guy not far from where I live here, who used to go out and play a guitar outside his house. And I know at first we heard it's like, who's playing a racket outside? But what he was doing was bringing the whole community out in his garden so that everybody was outside. They're all sitting in different bits of the gardens, just listening to that, but it brought them all together. People who would have been alone and stuck in the house, worried with COVID and everything. But he brought that to them and gave it, and I thought, that's amazing. Seeing things like that again, I think that kind of change, that kind of tradition is coming back, which is a great thing to see. That it's went one way and suddenly came back, that people are wanting to help each other, looking out for each other more, and there's more caring seems to be in it, and that's a positive.
Like part of that's got to do. Yeah, but I think that's got to do with.
Sorry,
no. Keep going.
That tradition of looking out for each other sort of came back into vogue, so to speak.
Yep.
Because of COVID, whereas it kind of started slipping. Right?
Yeah, it was a lot.
Nobody talked to their neighbours and so on and so forth. So that to me, as I said before, and you articulated that, Tony, is one of the positives that come out of it.
Yeah. I think it's really great. But also people look after themselves more, aren't they?
Well,
people thinking about their mental health, thinking about they are doing
we have to. This is part of the thing that I'm saying, is that it's been recognised now that it's not such a bad thing to say that you're stressed, or to say that you're lonely, or that you're not coping very well with something. There's still a little bit of the stiff upper lip going on there. But at the same time, I mean, I think way back a little bit in the episodes, we talked about toxic positivity. Oh, you'll be all right. Don't worry about it. What are you worried about? But at the same time, it's that getting together because we have to now, because a lot of the things that have been streamlined in some cases mean that we don't have the same access to things that we used to have. And it's that now we know what we're losing to a certain extent. And it's all changing. So the best thing to do is to go where you're familiar. And the familiarity is in the community. And to do things and to be part of the community and to start looking at stuff. And we've got an allotment just up the road. It does some great stuff, but it only does it towards spring when they can sell the plants and people will come and look at the plants. But everybody's been going to the allotment all year round who's got an allotment. And they've got a lot of knowledge that they can pass on as well. And so when we were down there the last time, the kids that were there was amazing to see kids. And I was thinking, wouldn't it be great to start a tradition whereby kids get back into growing things from seeds? Because we used to do it in gas jars and biology with the butterbean thing on the thing. And understanding what it is to actually nurture something that needs to grow, that needs help. And it gets them grounded back into what life actually is.
The grounded is the correct word, and you're in the ground. I say this because my wife had just planted potatoes, and she found these seeds in a local supermarket. So she's now got these little pots. Then I had to get little tabs so you could write on the tab what this is. This is mint, and this is cress, and this is whatever it is. And I thought, my wife's losing her marbles. But the thing about growing, it's a great thing. Growing things, gardening. I'd said that in my Techno Dinosaur monologues about being out in the fresh air and watching something grow that you've helped nurture. A great stress reliever. And if we can get kids into that, grounded in the ground and so on and so forth, would be a great advance. I know I'm going off at a tangent here, but
that's what we're here for.
Traditionally, well, my dad taught me.
That's reinvigorating an old tradition, isn't it? It's bringing back a tradition that's been lost.
Yeah. I mean, we almost had it. We always had the dig for Britain situation going on when we first got lockdowns and things like that, because it was actually getting people out and getting them exercised to a certain extent, getting in there and getting out, because it was like during the summer and spring. But also, one of the other things is when you grow something and it comes to ripeness and then you pluck it off the vine and you stick it in your gob and it tastes so different. And you know that was you. There was a whole cycle of life that went on there. And the stress relief that comes from doing these things. Because while your hands are busy, your mind is calm.
It's not just that, it gives a sense of achievement. And that's something that's great for some people to have, is the achievement in it. When we were younger, we used to have it in schools. And it used to be the one of two plants. You had daffodils or hyacinths. It was only two for some reason. It was only two they gave you. But you had the bulbs you were given. And it was the achievement. You brought them in and show everybody what you had done. And everybody would do it. But it was also competitive as well, because everybody wanted to win that. And it used to be in the local town hall right here that actually presented it and everything. And it was a great thing to get. And that's the idea, was to get kids involved with that. And I think one thing that lockdown really came great is I see more kids outside now than I saw before lockdown. You see the fact before that, they never went out a lot and didn't go out. You never saw them outside. See, when you restricted them for so long going out, they suddenly want to go out now. But now they're realising, like Willie said, how great it is to be out in the fresh air and doing things. And there's a couple of local ones here who've retired, and you see their grandkids wear them, and that's what they're doing. Because they're potting about in the garden, the grandkids are helping them, and they're joining it. So they are starting a new tradition with the young ones learning about gardening, learning how to look after it. Because if you look after your garden, you look after it growing, you're actually looking after yourself at the same time. So it's putting you in mental health. So it's a fantastic thing to bring back. That's a tradition that is good.
And it doesn't have to be a whole garden. It can be a bucket in the corner.
Yeah. It can be a potted plant inside the house on a windowsill. It can be anything.
I mean, Andrew, my husband, is absolutely just scunnered. If he absolutely knew what that word was, but that's what he is. I kept going into him the other day because I couldn't actually go out and do it properly because I was like, not well. And I said to him, what's the weather going to be like? What's the temperature going to be like overnight? Because I heard somewhere there was going to be a frost. And I've got tomato plants out there. And he's like, oh, God, here we go. So he's looking at the computer. He said, oh, yeah, it's going to be minus this. And I was like, right, get out there, get them into the kitchen. They need to be kept. They need to be doing this. And he's like, why? Because they're not ready yet. And this is Scotland. And all the stuff is for England. So, basically we're going to get snow until May. But I now have like 5 or 6 tomato plants, a few peas that are winding their way up a chair leg somewhere. Actually, I don't mind that because I'll put them out and I'll probably throw some Angela's way at one point because, you know, I do.
Then they'll die happily in my garden. Yeah.
Well, yeah, you know, they have an adventure and, you know, the foxes come and play with them or whatever. But it's one of those things that it does make you want to share. If you, I don't know, I had to learn that you don't have to use all the seeds in the packet, that you can do it in stages.
Another tradition was if you grew tomatoes or whatever, potatoes, if you had a superfluity, if that's the word, you would give them to your neighbours or to your family.
Yeah.
Right, and say, and I've grown them myself, by the way. Right. And you have a sense of achievement to go, oh, that's great, free tomatoes or free potatoes. Right, that's a great tradition. And I think we can resurrect that. My mind is now back in the old sitcom The Good Life.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Again,
I think that's partly what's wrong with me. I think that's partly what happened. Too much The Good Life when I was that very interesting age. You can't do that because it's on repeats now. So
yes, you're self-sufficiency.
I don't put the telly
on. That's another new tradition. So yeah, so it's food for thought, isn't it? About traditions and cultural differences. And
was that a Freudian slip? The food for thought.
I was thinking that.
I'm kind of getting into the wrap-up stage here, boys. So, you know.
Aye, it's a bit early.
Is it? You told me. All right then. So traditionally we go for an hour. So we'll go for an hour then, shall we?
But can I put a spanner in the works with there?
Oh,
because
no.
we talk a lot about positivity, right? And how traditions we changed. How do you change traditions that are not so positive? One of the things that recently came up was somebody that came up in our network thing this morning, and somebody talking about when will it change with songs, music. They were listening to a song, but then they realised the words of the song when they were doing it, you couldn't actually say, because now it wouldn't be PC to do that.
Oh my goodness.
Another way is football.
This is Delilah, isn't it?
Don't start at all.
I'm not saying what a song is, right? But then football as well.
Basically, it's biblical.
How
so
do we get people to change that then, so that for good traditions going forward in it and stop things from too much of the past, that there's no real relevance to nowadays?
It's got a lot of stuff to understand that it's of its time, and this is what you get on programs, on films, when you see people smoking their lungs out, when you see them being nasty and vicious and all the rest of it, like films like Mad Max for a start. That's one of the gratuitous, violent ones. But at the same time, it's one of those things that it's of its time. As long as we understand that, and it's actually a good thing to say, that was then, this is now. But particularly this song, when all these people were saying, oh, we can't do that because it's about murder. It's about murder. Well, there are many, many songs about murders, particularly folk songs, and particularly traditional things, because it's a lesson in you don't do this. It's not glorifying something. It's actually, you know, yeah, everybody loves to sing the Tom Jones chorus thing going along because it's kind of cheerful and all the rest of it. But it's actually a way of saying, you know what? That was normal for him, but that's not how it should be done. That was something that was done then. And actually, when you think about the name of the character, biblical name, Samson and she cut his hair off and then tried to kill him with the Philistines. So, you know, if you're going to go, where do you stop? If you're going to complain about murder and incest and all the rest of it that's going on in the world, where do you put the line?
It's also from that perspective as what's of its time. Programs like Friends would not be made today, or at least not with the same content. There's a lot of things in that are questionable these days. So if you're going to start looking at things like that, are you then going to say, right, okay, we're not going to have Friends on TV? I think there's a couple of different stations would shut down because that's all they ever play.
Oh, yeah.
But there's so many different TV shows, or even just episodes of TV shows, that are not politically correct these days. So never mind songs, you've got films, you've got TV shows, you've got books. I actually read Sleeping Beauty to my niece and nephews at the weekend. The guy comes in and kisses the girl when she's asleep. That's not consent.
Well, so no, but it gets even worse than that, because the original story, it's actually rape.
So I'm not going to look at the original story, but I'm just thinking from that perspective, there's messages in these things, and if you start changing them too much, you lose all meaning. And yes, some of it's questionable. So perhaps just don't use that story anymore. But I believe that there was a big situation as well with, I think, a lot of the Roald Dahl books that they've gone and changed certain words or changed meanings. Why don't we
Because
just look at new books?
now the words are used for something else.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
but you've got to be careful because they
there's
can
so many
lose.
new books.
And when you read that book again,
books.
it won't have the same impact that it had before because of these changes. And I think that's what the person was trying to say this morning. They were worried about, because what they were singing in case someone else hearing that, and said, but it's like tradition or something that some they've always done in certain situations. But that's the thing.
But also, just because something's always been done some way doesn't mean it should always be done some way.
So however, should it be forgotten? Because if we forget it, we are doomed to repeat it.
Correct.
Lessons of history. It's just like they're now looking at Shakespeare. They're now looking at Agatha Christie. And let's be honest, Shakespeare was what, 16 something or other? And that's 4 centuries ago. It was bound to be different, right?
And there was no TVs for a start.
My view would be, right, this might contain material that might offend you. So don't read it. Right?
Yeah.
If you want the updated version, go to the Virtual Signaling Penguin bookstore and buy the modern version.
Remote control.
Right, or turn it off. I know traditionally we didn't have this thing with an absolute inalienable right to be offended.
Yeah.
So traditionally we said, if you're offended by that, well, tough. Now it's almost built into law that I have a right to be offended. And it doesn't matter if you're offended or not. If I'm offended, that's a bad thing. So I've got to get rid of it. So when we become that way, where we're getting rid of traditions that were perfectly all right in their day, because nowadays they might offend. Like, for example, first footing, you come with a bit of black coal. Can we say that now? No, it's a tradition. Or a bit of shortbread. Well, that's a bit fattest, is it not? Or whatever. Right, you bring your bottle of whiskey in. Well, that might offend some people who don't like whiskey. Right, so where do you draw the line between the tradition, and it is what it is, and yes, there's no right to offend people. Right, I used to have to arrest people who were offensive, right, to other people, right, but we don't have a legal right not to be offended, and I think that's been played upon to a large extent by people who, right, I'm offended, you've got to change your mind, you've got to do things differently. And personally, and a man of a certain age, says, well, suck it up, right? If you're offended, as Leslie said, there's the remote control, switch it off. Don't pick the book up. Don't watch the movie or whatever it is. So tradition, I'm all for tradition, as long as it's, as you said, Tony, there are positivities to it. If it's a good thing. If the tradition's a bad thing, yeah, by all means get rid of it. But not if there's that kernel of goodness or positivity or longevity about it, that, you know, okay, my dad did that, and is it still okay? Yeah, it is. So why not?
Well, if we've had to go to the extent of putting on packets of peanuts, warning, this may contain peanuts, surely we can just put on a book, warning, this may contain words that you don't like.
Or you got McDonald's.
Well, every television program. Every television program now, if you have been affected by anything, here's this line for the Samaritans. Yeah. How have we become so fragile?
That's what my point is. Yeah. Why is it now
I think it should be
they
useful.
have to be offended by something that you really seem you think a lot of these things now, the ones they're talking about, made everybody laugh at the time. A lot of the things are that they pick up, it's comedy things and things like that as well, that gave someone something good. I had one on top of the other day, the most violent one they've ever seen. And I said, well, the most violent thing I ever saw was Tom and Jerry, and it was brilliant. I mean, always battled.
They banned that years ago.
Yeah, it was fantastic.
Still on
you
YouTube,
these
though.
things, mouse and cats everywhere.
I said, oh great, I can go and watch it again.
Watch a whole generation sitting there, kids laughing their heads off.
Even as children, we knew not to do that. You know, you didn't bash somebody with a pan, although, it did happen to me once because I washed the dishes instead of drying them. My friend hit me with a lead-based pan on the back of the head, and I'm sure that's why I survived the car accident. But never mind. Angela, you were going to say something.
No, I can't remember what it was now.
But it just shows how crazy it is, isn't it? That so many things brought so much laughter, so much good feeling, well-being, health to people that we want to change that now. That's the bit that gets me. I love that it's people's choice. That's what we've got to remember at tradition. Traditions are our choice where we want to carry them on or not. And if it makes people happy and it's not offending them, let them do it.
Is it a case of that we're spiraling? Okay, that we're spiraling so far down the rabbit hole of PC-ness that we've lost all sight of common sense.
Yeah, because one person's PC is not another person's PC.
No, common sense is not common anymore.
It's perspective.
It was surgically removed in the 70s.
That's why I was never born with it then.
Absolute, across the board, common sense-ectomy in the 70s. And then the 80s, everybody just went mad.
So no, my point was going to be that you referenced all the different programs having the trigger warnings and the hotline to call at the end of it. I actually think that's a good thing, because if there are things in these programs that are triggering people, it gives them somewhere that they do know that they can go to that's not phoning 999.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the ability to then have someone to talk to and have someone to have a conversation with about something that might have been brought up. There might be better numbers than the ones that are going across the screens, but at least it's somewhere for people to be signposted to if something has affected them. And I think that's really beneficial. It's scary that there are so many trigger warnings now required, but I think it's really beneficial to actually be able to signpost people to somewhere that says, go to this person, have a conversation if you need to. And that's what we all do. That's what we're all here for.
Yeah,
that's why we've all started our businesses, right? To help people. Yeah, for us.
For us. We'll tell you what to do. We'll tell you how to get rid of it or to.
I won't tell anyone what to do. Thank you very much.
Take the bullets out. I know. I say it on purpose. Because that's your trigger.
No, it's not a trigger. It's just a comment that I don't know what to do.
Doing one of these, in my day, there was a trigger, and he was a four-legged friend, and he was a big Palomino horse, and Roy Rogers rode him, and he was great. And there were a few things that happened in times like in those days that we look back in fondness because it was our childhood, but it doesn't make it right.
Mm-hmm.
But now we know that it doesn't matter. It was still part of our history. It was still part of who we were, what we enjoyed, how we looked at it, how we saw life. I mean, there was a time there's a program on Till Death Us Do Part, and they are still showing that now. And that surprises me. That really surprises me.
I didn't know that was still on. Yeah.
Oh, it's on one of the Freeview channel things. Don't go there if you're going to be even slightly.
The good thing about that is, Leslie, you have to go and look for it. Right?
Yeah.
So
but actually, you can see it when you're going down the things.
Well, you're not going to be offended with that, right? So, if you don't want violence, don't watch any Dirty Harry movies. Do not.
Or the news.
Any circumstances, watch any John Wick movies, right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Or, Matt Damon and the what's
Bourne
the word?
Films.
The Bourne films.
The Bourne films.
No,
right?
him.
But Jason Bourne. But there's some of the older films, like anything with Vincent Price in it.
Brilliant.
If you remember him, scary. You better believe it, right?
But they were scary because you didn't see the violence. Well, it was all left to your imagination.
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So
that's not a bad tradition to come back then.
Yeah, well, you can scare yourself silly if you want to, but it's one of those things that it depends on where your mind is now going to go. Are we now going to the nth degree of this is going to scare me, I'm going to be scared now, and I'm going to worry, and I'm going to stress that everything that's going to happen from now on that I see, hear, speak, touch, do, is going to be terrifying?
Although
basically, traditions are great when they're positive, and they've taught us lessons in the past. It's our choice now whether we want to carry them on or not.
Well, yeah, I mean, we were talking earlier as well about the fact that, traditionally corporal punishment was the thing. And that was not positive. It was supposed to be something that stopped you from doing certain behaviours. Didn't always work with some people. I only got belted twice in my life. I always got away with it.
Why does that not surprise me?
There's a way, though, Willie. There's a way. Where there's a will, there's a way.
And you found it, yeah, okay.
So basically, there's a lot of stuff that's going on in the world. We had a big shock because we were lulled into a false sense of security about how healthy we could be, that our NHS was great, and that we could just pop down to the local A&E if we had a stubbed toe, and it would be fine because somebody would see us and patch us up, and we'd have to sit there and wait for 6 hours, but we could then sit and complain and grumble about it while we were waiting, which would make us feel better. And, you know, the world was kind of a sensible place. And then we had a shock. We had a short, sharp slap on the bahookie that said, you are not actually superhuman. You are not immortal. And this is what will happen to you because there are still things that can hurt you. That doesn't mean to say, though, that it's going to be something we will not actually adapt and survive. Because as human beings, what we are really, really good at, hence we are top of the food chain, is adapting and surviving. We just have to learn now about the mental acuity, understanding that how we think, what we think, and what emotions we allow to trundle along in there actually will make things happen and manifest situations and ways of being that perhaps we will go down a rabbit hole and we won't find the way out and without help, which is why we started this at the very beginning of lockdown, and which why we're still talking about it, because you had a great word for it, but I have to say it because I've forgotten your word. The great resignation is still happening, the existential thing about people figuring out that they're doing things that they don't really want to do. They want to leave the traditional 9-to-5 job and the contract for life, which really doesn't happen anyway. And they want to go out and do something, not entirely sure what, but they want to do something. But when they fall down that hole between where they were and where they want to be, because something doesn't come up and go, hi, I'm something and I'm just for you, then we are your next best option. And with that, I hope you're feeling very well and that this has not upset you at all, because basically we did not mean to do that. Take care of yourself, look after yourself, and like the guy on the telly in the old days used to say before it went off to a little white dot, lock all your doors and windows and have a good night.